Today on With the First Pick, we're continuing our division-by-division look at the most impact-ready rookie classes, the players who can be highly productive in the 2025 season. On Tuesday, we looked at the AFC, and today we're headed to the NFC. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's former Titans GM Ran Carthon. This is episode 260. And Ran, I know you don't care, but they are still 336 days until the 2026 NFL Draft in Pittsburgh, PA. Before we get going, I want to make a special a note here. You got your Indianapolis Colts jerseys behind you, number 35. Shout out to Mr. Irsay, who passed away last night. Do you want to say anything about that and your time in Indianapolis? Because we've talked a little bit about that in previous podcasts.
Yeah, RIP to the boss, man. You know, it was tough news to get yesterday. Just that organization means so much to me and my dad. Me and my dad are one of the few father and son combos to have played for the organization. My dad played there his last year in the league in '92. And Mr. Irsay was the GM, and then I came in 2004 to 2006, and he was the team owner at that time. So RIP to the boss, man. That's why I got the jerseys out today.
Yeah, one of the cool things that you see when you're in the Indianapolis airport is Mr. Irsay's guitar collection, his music. He's a huge music guy, and he lent it to the Indianapolis International Airport, so you can see he has like a Beatles guitar. Like, he had a bunch of fantastic memorabilia. But yeah, thank you for sharing that, because we've talked in the past about your experiences on that Colts team, beating up on my Steelers team and BMAC Steelers team back in 2005 when y'all were piping that crowd noise into the RCA Dome. I don't want to talk about that, but we will talk about the memory that you have for Mr. Irsay on those great teams, won Super Bowls, and thank you for that, Rand. All right, let's get to the show today. Again, impact rookie classes. If you missed it, you can go back and listen to Tuesday's episode where we did the AFC in the old podcast feed. We're headed to the NFC, and we're going to start in the NFC North today, Rand. And let's go to Chicago, because you have a guy who has already come out and said, I just saw a headline where he has a soft tissue injury, so he's going to have to wait a little bit, but he's already come out and said that he's going to make the teams pay that passed on him. Second-round pick, Luther Burden, wide receiver, out of Missouri, joins Colston Loveland in Chicago with Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson. Luther Burden's one of your guys. You can tell him about your other guy after you talk about Luther.
Yeah, so starting off with Luther, I just think the fit for him and his skill set is great for this offense in Chicago. And I think he's going to play that Amon-Ra St. Brown type role, because, Luther primarily played in the slot and was really productive in the slot for Mizzou over the last couple of years. But they did a really good job of just getting the ball in his hands in a variety of ways. And I see, him fitting in this very same way in the Chicago offense. And just a guy, you just get the ball in his hands and you just move out of the way and let him do his thing. And it's unfortunate that he suffered the soft tissue injury, because he's going to need those reps, coming in, especially learning how to be a more nuanced route runner to help, bring him along as not only just a slot receiver, but a guy that could play on the outside as well. But I think if he's healthy, he's going to be a real strong weapon for Caleb Williams. And then my second guy, again, like we talked about in the previous show, I want to try to talk about some guys who aren't probably as well known, or guys we hadn't talked about much. And so the one guy that stood out to me for this next one is Warren Brinson, the defensive tackle out of Georgia that was taken by Green Bay. Now, I was really excited about his college tape in 2023. He was a rotational guy at that time, but we're talking about an interior disruptor that can penetrate gaps, that can hit gaps. Now, I did have some issues with the instincts, and that's why I think this fit for him in Green Bay and this halfly off defense, is what's going to fit him the best. It's just get off, attack, be disruptive, tackle the running back on the way to the quarterback. And I think this fits him really well. And now, especially because he's going to be a rotational guy playing behind Kenny Clark and Devontae Wyatt. And I think my man, the GM down in Green Bay, I think he has an affinity for UGA defensive tackles, because they've also taken with Devontae Wyatt, Warren Brinson, and Nazir Stackhouse. So they're going to have a plethora of Georgia guys in the interior playing strong defense for them.
Man, Georgia guys are all over the place. Green Bay and Philly are two of the most popular for sure. I want to go back to Luther Burden III for a second, because you talked about how unfortunate it is that he suffered the soft tissue injury. But this is a recurring theme every single year with almost it feels like every single rookie. Obviously not every single rookie, but I would imagine the answer you're going to give me as part of it said they're preparing for the combine and running in straight lines and the sort of the field day portion of the pre-draft workout. Is there any way to combat from the end of the pre-draft workout process to the start of OTAs and minicamps combat those soft tissue injuries in these young players who are now asking their bodies to do more football-related things than track-related things?
So the big difference is years ago when they redid the CBA, they shortened the offseason, right? And so that was more beneficial to the veterans. And now you're getting the younger guys coming in with less time to work with the coaches and to acclimate into a new program, in the NFL. So I think we need to go back to having a more long off-season program to get these guys acclimated, because the game is about development, right? It's about developing these young guys and having them in for the long haul of their career. And it's hard to do that, now when the offseason is shortened. And the NFL game and the college game is so different from a technique and fundamental standpoint that these guys come in behind. You get DBs that have never backpedaled. We're talking about, receivers now that have only been able to run, one or two routes. You have quarterbacks that have never really truly read coverages. And so the longer the offseason program, the better it is for these young guys in their development.
No, that's a great answer. And that there's no easy answer, it sounds like, because you're dealing with not necessarily two different sports, but two sports that aren't necessarily similar either. So you got to figure that out. You got to figure out the logistical red tape side of things in terms of the union and their relationship with the league. And that's not doesn't feel like it's going to be a 30-minute conversation to solve that problem. All right, I'm going to stay in Green Bay, and I'm going to take a page out of the Ran Carthon book and try to go a little bit off the radar here. I went with Savion Williams. We talked about him a lot during the pre-draft process out of TCU. Wide receiver, struggled with some drops, so they moved him to running back, and he split his time in terms of playing both positions. And he was dynamic, almost 6'5", ran sub 4.5, and reminded me a little bit of Cordero Patterson. How do you think they're going to use him in Green Bay? Because he's listed as a wide receiver. They obviously drafted Matthew Golden in the first round to be their wide receiver 1A. We'll figure out how that works out with Jaden Reed, whose agent has made it known that Jaden has some questions about the pecking order there. They have Romeo Doubs. Christian Watson has the injuries coming off of Dontavian Wicks, and then they have those incredibly athletic tight ends. What do you think the plan is with Savion Williams, with Jordan Love, and, of course, Josh Jacobs in the backfield?
Well, if you look at the tree that Matt LaFleur comes from, he comes from that Shanahan tree. So he has the knowledge, having gone against it, but then, still having that connection to Kyle and those guys, that they could use him the same way the 49ers use Deebo Samuel, and just find different ways to get him the ball, line him in the backfield, line him in the slot, create those mismatches. And so Matt's seen it, and now he has his version of Deebo, so I'm sure he has a clear-cut plan for him.
That's a good call. I didn't think about the Deebo comparison, and he's a little bit bigger than Deebo. He's probably 3 or 4 inches taller than Deebo. Maybe not quite as thick, but he's thick enough. And the way he played, just sort of scratching the surface on playing that position at running back last year, was impressive. So it's going to be fun to watch now that they have these playmakers that guys can get into space and make guys miss, or in Savion's case, run through guys if he needs to. The other guy I'm going to talk about, also a skill position player, Ty Felton, day 2 pick of the Minnesota Vikings. And you can watch the behind the scenes Minnesota Vikings day 1, day 2 process over on YouTube, and that's where I sort of got the idea to talk about Ty. We talked about him during the fall. Ran sub 4.4, played mostly outside. He can play inside, but played mostly outside at Maryland. 6 feet, about 183. So not the biggest guy, but he plays much bigger than he weighed. Ran, and his contested catch ability is something that KOC, Kevin O'Connell, talked about when asked about why they liked him so much. And the idea of him not having to be number 1 or number 2, you have JJ, Justin Jefferson, you have Jordan Addison, and then you have Ty Felton. How do you think he's going to ease into the process of being in that wide receiver room with a new quarterback in JJ McCarthy?
I mean, you said it, like, he's not the biggest guy, but he plays bigger than what he is. And guys like this, he's a guy that you heard a lot about in the fall. And so I was excited to watch the tape, and especially talking to my sources over at Maryland, about the type of kid he is. He's going to work his way in the lineup. You mentioned Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison's not very big at all. I want to say he may be under 180, but he makes plays all across the field. So I expect this guy to really push, for some playing time, and push Jalen Naylor and all those guys, for that third receiver spot.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that Jordan Addison, and thanks for bringing that up. He was sub 180 coming out of Pitt and then USC. Ran a slow, quote-unquote, 4.47, I believe. At the end of the day, let's just watch Jordan Addison play, and he has been balling out. He had to take over when JJ got hurt at points in the last few years. So I think we can see a similar type progression from Ty Felton, especially now that the he's going to have those two guys in the wide receiver room with him. All right, that's it for the NFC North. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to make our way to the NFC South and see who our impact rookies are in that division right after this. All right, Ran. NFC North is in the books, headed to the NFC South. I'm starting to think that you are on the Falcons payroll because you can't quit talking about what Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris did, in the draft. It was impressive. There's no two ways about it. I know in the moment some people were confused and maybe some fans were angry that the Falcons gave up an extra first-round pick, but they got a first-round player in James Pierce Jr., and they get him this year. Don't have to wait a year. So they're going to pair him with they got Xavier Watts, they got Jalen Walker, they got your guy Billy Bowman. So there's a lot of reasons to be excited if you are the Falcons, especially given the way their defense played last year and the way they're now expected to play this year.
Yeah, and I took a page out of your book, talking about the impact, rookie. I'm looking at this entire Atlanta draft class. And like you said, you mentioned Jalen Walker, James Pierce Jr., Xavier Watts, Billy Bowman, Jack Nelson. Like all of these guys have a chance to play. We talked about the guys in the first round. We talked about those guys. But let's talk about these two safeties in the fourth round. You get Xavier Watts, who probably should have been a day 2 pick at some point. And then Billy Bowman, who I've always affectionately just referred to as badass Billy Bowman. You talk about a guy who's, a little small, but he is physical, and you just love his physicality, the toughness in which he plays. And right now, there's not a true role for him in the defense per se, but I think he'll come in and compete for the nickel spot. And if he doesn't win a spot on defense, he will be a core forward special teams guy for you and could have an impact like Sidney Brown had in Philly when he was healthy. So this whole class as a whole, not a lot of people talking about 5 total picks, but we're talking about 5 guys. And even like saying Jack Nelson, he's going to factor into the rotation at some point, with those guys, being whether they're healthy or not. But all 5 of these guys have a chance to make an impact on this Atlanta Falcons team.
Yeah, Billy Bowman, you mentioned Sidney Brown. Sidney ran really well in the pre-draft process. I think sub 4.4, he and his brother both. He got injured in Philly, but undersized and does a lot of the same things that Billy Bowman does. Something else to keep in mind, you can make a note of this. Peyton Bowen, the other safety at Oklahoma, I actually watched him yesterday in preparation for the 2026 draft class because we got 336 days, Ran, so I got to be prepared. And a little heads up, I don't know if you knew this yet, Ran, but in July, I think, we're going to be doing a little summer scouting. So I was doing a little homework there because the draft does not stop for anyone. But anyway, he was balling out next to Billy Bowman last year at Oklahoma. They got another one coming down the pipe for the Sooners there. Before I move on to my guys, I know we talked about this before, but it's worth bringing up again. Have these picks in this Falcons draft class now put them solely in the conversation of battling the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in that division? Because I suppose we were having that conversation last year with the addition of Kirk Cousins, who obviously wasn't 100%. Feels like they have their quarterback in Michael Penix Jr. The offense they're loaded with skill position players. I'm talking about that for years now. But this defense feels like with Raheem, it could have a chance to turn a corner.
I think so. And I think especially it starts with those 2 guys that they were able to get on the edges. And that's one thing that has been missing in Atlanta for quite some time. And they've taken, a lot of shots at trying to fix it. And I think that with the talent level of Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr., I think they have the guys to get it right this time. And so I think if these 2 guys come along, and again, like you said, with Raheem and his defensive mind, I think these guys can push those other teams in the NFC South.
All right, we're going to stay in the division. I'm going to go to Carolina. And I'm going to talk about some edge rushers as well because the Panthers defense not been great. Let's be honest. Since Brian Burns left, they lost some players, Frankie Louvu as well. But they are in the process of rebuilding it. Dan Morgan, the GM, took that very seriously during this draft. They got Ted McMillan, obviously, to help out their young quarterback. But on the defensive side, they got Nick Scordon in round 2, the edge rusher at Texas A&M. And you've talked previously about how if he drops a few pounds, maybe he'll be a little more explosive like he was at Purdue, not like he was at Texas A&M last year where the production wasn't quite there. But then they circle back on day 3 and got Princely Umanmielen out of Ole Miss by way of the Florida Gators there. And I was just looking over my notes to double-check about Princely, and I said he was one of the twitchiest pass rusher in that draft class at times last year. The consistency wasn't always there, But talk to me about the addition of two explosive edge rushers, and one's a little bit bigger than the other by about 15 to 20 pounds. Gordon's about 20 pounds heavier than Princely Mamiellan. But what that means for that defense in a post-Brian Burns world, because they struggled at times last year coming off the edge.
I mean, you look at their defensive coordinator, Ejiro Evero, who is a really good young defensive coordinator, really smart, and employs a bunch of different looks. And so now you have two edge guys that fit any look that they're trying to employ on their defense. And so like you were mentioning with Princely, like Princely's taller, he's longer, he's athletic. He's a guy that, he has some craft to him. Now, like you said, he's got to play more consistent. And I think that comes with experience. At both Ole Miss and at Florida, he was a part of a heavy rotation. So he was never really able to really get it going. And then Nick Scorton he was a heck of a pass rusher at Purdue, was productive there. Didn't quite see the same production at Texas A&M, which could be a variety of reasons why, because of the depth that they had at Texas A&M. But we're still talking about a guy that set physical and aggressive edges and consistently knocked the edge guy back in the backfield and reset the line of scrimmage. And so he's going to bring that. And again, you're going to need that in NFC South, because there's a variety of ball in the NFC South. When it's time to run the ball, they have teams that can do it. But then they also have quarterback play in which you have to be able to get the quarterback on the ground. And so I think they address both of those needs.
Nick Scorton, thick. Derek Brown, one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL. They drafted Cam Jackson out of your Florida Gators. I loved him coming out. They got him on day 3, another huge presence in the middle of that defense. And they got Latham Ransom, the strong safety out of Ohio State, who will pop you in the mouth. So they're making a concerted effort to get tougher down the spine of that defense, and then add those edge rushers we talked about and scored in New Mamiellan. And again, this team might be surprising some folks. They feel like, are they the New England Patriots of the NFC South in terms of we're sleeping on them, but maybe they got the right pieces in place?
I'd say not yet. Not yet. I just think with what New England was able to do this off season, and then we speak about it a lot. You still have to add in the factor of the head coach, and that's no knock on Dave Canales, but we've seen Mike Vrabel coach teams and get teams over the hump that may not have been good enough to get over the hump.
Yeah, I'm going to give Dave Canales credit, though, for getting Bryce Young back to hopefully where he was supposed to be. I'm assuming Dave had something to do with that, and Bryce did as well, because I thought Bryce's career was over after week 2 in Carolina, and then he bounced back, had a strong finish to his second season. We'll see how season 3 goes. All right, New Orleans, before we take another quick break here, the Saints, and we talked to death of Tyler Shuck and what he means for this team as the 40th overall pick with Derek Carr's retirement. But I'm going to talk on the defensive side of the ball about Jonas Sanker, the safety out of UVA. Didn't talk a lot about UVA during the pre-draft process, but Sanker was special. He was special during the fall. He will come downhill and pop you in the mouth. He can play in space. Had a really good Senior Bowl. Ended up being a day 2 pick, and I love the idea of him learning from Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu. They have Jordan Howden there. Justin Reed they signed in the offseason. So that's secondary, especially at the safety position, is suddenly one of their strong suits on defense.
Yeah, and that's always been a mainstay in this Saints defense, is having those safeties and the versatility of the safeties and the physical nature. Because, again, you're going to need that in the NFC South.
Drafted Quincy Riley as well out of Louisville, can play outside, and he is a juiced-up cornerback. They have Kool-Aid McKinstry, who they drafted last year in the second round. The quarterback situation is one they got to sort out, and we've talked about that, and we know about that. But they did get Kelvin Banks to help solidify the offensive line. That means they're probably moving on from Trevor Penning, their former first-round pick, who hasn't quite worked out. But defensively, they're in a good space. And Brandon Staley's defensive coordinator. Offensive coordinator Doug Nussmeier, and I mentioned that because his son has a chance to be the first quarterback, sort of looking ahead to next year's draft class. The Nuss bus out of LSU, that's going to be a lot of fun to watch as well. But we have plenty of time for the 2026 NFL Draft conversation, Ran. For now, I'm going to take another quick break here, and when we come back, I'm going to head to the NFC East, talk about some of our favorite rookie impact players right after this. All right, Ran, Jerry Jones promises fireworks. Never really got the fireworks unless you're including the George Pickens trade, which happened a couple of weeks ago. But you're going to start in Dallas with an impact rookie that you think has a chance to be impactful in 2025. Who are you starting with?
My man, Jaden Blue. And he was one of my favorite guys to watch his tape. You talk about elusiveness. You talk about having what we call blue level elusiveness. The first guy never really brings him down. And we're talking about a guy that was really productive at Texas last year. I think he had 8 rushing touchdowns and 6 receiving touchdowns on 42 catches. And he's going to factor into that third down role. I think he'll compete with Miles Sanders, for some time there, just because they're so different from the starting running back. And I think he can make an impact and get him out in Brian Schottenheimer's offense and make some plays and get him in some isolation one-on-one routes against these linebackers. And then for my next guy, we're going to go up to Philly and go with safety Andrew Makuba. And again, we were talking about some of the other safeties. This is a guy that he tackles you face to face. He's going to put his face on you, and he's looking to annihilate you every single time he comes in for the hit. And if you want to throw this in, he changed the course of college football playoff last year when he took out Carson Beck with that big hit. And that changed the course of it, and which put Ohio State in the driver's seat to go ahead and win the national championship. And again, this guy is physical. He has the size of a corner. I think he's less than 190 pounds, but that doesn't affect him not one bit. And to me, he's going to give Philly another version of a guy like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, minus the mouth.
That's a great way to put it. That's disrespectful to your former U of F guy too, calling Chauncey mouthy. But Makuba is incredibly smart, Clemson transfer, and he plays like he's 205. He doesn't play like he's 188. He ran well pre-draft process, but he played plenty fast. And as you noted, he will come downhill and knock you in the mouth no matter who you are. I'm going to start in Philly, and I'm going to work my way back to Dallas, because Makuba was a fantastic pick on day 2. And day 1, they traded up a spot and got Jahad Campbell. And it just feels like a situation where the rich are getting richer in Philadelphia. And if you're, we talked about this in the AFC with the way that the Chiefs drafted to stay atop and the way that the Bills and Ravens also drafted to try to keep pace with Kansas City. I don't know if any team in the NFC is able to keep pace with the Philadelphia Eagles based on this draft class, Ran. So Jahad Campbell has a chance to come in and start right away because we don't know Kobe Dean's situation with the knee injury. And then you talk about Makuba, and then last year's draft class with those guys they got in the secondary, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. Is this team who's going to beat this team? I guess is the question I have for you.
I don't know, because they are to me, they are the class. They're not only the class of the NFC, but they're the class of the entire league right now. Because let's be honest, who have they lost? They lose Josh Sweat, which I think they'll be able to find, another guy that could play, very similar to that. So, Howie Roseman and these guys, they've done a great job of being able to not only build a winner, but build a consistent winner and always being able to replenish. And like you said, and we talked about this with Baltimore, somehow the rich get richer, that these really good players always fall in these guys' lap.
Yeah, you mentioned Josh Sweat. They lost Mekhi Becton, and they drafted Miles Drew Kendall, and then Cam Williams, the right tackle out of Texas, played with Makuba last season. So they have all sorts of plan Bs and plan Cs. They have Landon Dickerson and then Tyler Steen, who they formerly drafted out of Alabama by way of Vanderbilt. And you just look at this draft class, Smile Munden, another off-ball linebacker they got on day 3. Ty Robinson out of Nebraska, who can play defensive end or kick inside to 3 technique if you want. So they have answers to all the questions of every single test, it feels like, and they have them well in advance of everyone else. So we'll see how it plays out. Also, they got a victory with the tush push. So all things are turning up Eagles. Way to go, producer Sharon. Congratulations. All right. I'm going to go back to Dallas and not talk about Jaden Blue, but talk about the guy that was drafted first, 12th overall, and will be blocking for Jaden Blue, Tyler Booker. And you have experience with drafting offensive linemen early in the draft class. Tyler Booker's a guard. I don't think this is too high to draft a guard, especially someone like Tyler Booker, especially coming onto this offensive line. Is this Dallas Cowboys team sneaky good? Are they going to be competitive? I mean, they win 11 games every year, then they flame out in January. Will this year be different, I guess is the question, with the addition of Tyler Booker, and then we talked about Jaden Blue, and then, of course, trading for George Pickens?
I think it has all the makings to be good. And like we talked about on a previous show, like this division has a chance to be the division to have 3 playoff teams come from it. Now, I think the one big question that still remains for the Dallas Cowboys is, are they going to be able to run the ball? And do they have enough in the backfield to be able to run the ball now? And that's going to be the key, because, again, you got Dak coming off of a major injury that forced him to miss a significant amount of time last year. And so he needs to be supplemented by the run game. And if they have a run game that's at least viable, then it's going to create all types of explosives for George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb downfield.
Yeah, I feel like the run game will be better with Javonte Williams, the addition of him, assuming he's as close to healthy as he can be. Before that ACL, he was having a pretty good start to his NFL career. You mentioned Jaden Blue. You mentioned Miles Sanders. So I think this running game will be better than last year with the addition to the running back room and also with the upgrade of the offensive line position. But we'll all find out together. Speaking of running games, one last thing before we take a break here, Rand. Let's go to New York and talk about the Giants. And we know about Jackson Dart. But they also drafted Cam Skattebo, and that's a running back room that includes Tyrone Tracy, a day 3 pick last year, former wide receiver who showed that versatility as a rookie. And now you have Skattebo, you have Devin Singletary. And it's not necessarily a joke. I'm actually sort of serious. You might only get 3 good years out of Skattebo because of the intensity with which he plays the position. But I don't know if there's anyone who is tougher and a bigger heart, and that sounds sort of cliche, but I'm not even joking, than Cam Skattebo and what he brings to that NFL running back room. How would you use him in New York, given all the other weapons you have in that running back room?
I think he's your banger. I think he's your between the tackles, go get it, set the tone, type of guy for them in that offense. And they're going to need that. They're going to need that. They're going to need to be able to extend drives and keep the other team's offense off the field, and this is the guy that's able to do it. And trust me, Skattebo, he's got some big shoes to fill, rocking that number 44. Ahmad Bradshaw rocked the 44, and then if you could look over my shoulder over here, or maybe it's the other side, and my pops, wore number 44 in that Giants uniform and won 2 Super Bowls. So no pressure on you, Mr. Skattebo.
All Skattebo would do is throw up in the trash can and go out there and get 110 yards like he did in that playoff game against Texas, I believe. I love the pick. When you're sort of evaluating these players like Skattebo, who have a ton of mileage on him, he transferred from Sac State and then was the primary show in town at Arizona State. How does that affect how high you want to take someone who is given the way with which he plays the game? Because he's not a guy that's looking to run out of bounds. He's looking to run over a linebacker and then take a safety with him on his way to the ground.
Yeah, I think it definitely factors in, and that goes in terms of the player value. And then that allows you to put a value on the player, the nature of the position, the amount of tread left, the injury history, like all that puts you in a certain box, in a certain category. But then the other factor of it you have to really factor in is like, are you going to be there? You can't worry about if a guy's going to be there in the second contract because you may not be there to see this guy to the second contract. So let's win now. Let's build for the future, but let's win now and then worry about that when the time comes.
Putting a lot of pressure on Jackson Dart. Save everybody's job. So let's hope Jackson is up to the task. 25th overall pick out of Ole Miss. All right, let's take another break here. 3 divisions down, 1 to go. Going to head out west and hit the NFC West. Talk about those impact rookie players right after this. All right, Rand, I joked that you work for the Falcons. You also work for the 49ers because you love this young man, more than I love all the players that I love, talking about the 49ers draft class. And we've talked about this before, but it's worth reiterating. Our buddy Lee J. Doosbull, who played for the Jets, played for the Bills, played in San Francisco under Robert Saleh. He wasn't crazy about this draft class, especially the interior defensive lineman they got. But you and I were of a different opinion, and your opinion is probably more valuable because you know the inner workings of how that defense works under the various iterations of the DCs that have been there. So talk about your guy, C.J. West out of Indiana, who is now in San Francisco as a defensive lineman.
Yeah, so, knowing that we were coming up on this segment, I pulled my phone out, and I'm just going to hold my phone to see how quick I get a text from Lige for talking about C.J. West and his fit. But I think this guy's going to be a DJ Jones clone. And for this 49er defense and how they plan to use him. Again, we're talking about another attacking style defense. And this is what this guy does. He attacks, he gets off, he's disruptive and creates, havoc in the backfield, if you will. And I think he's going to push. I think this guy could be a day one starter, for them, because you're looking at Jordan Elliott, you're looking at Kevin Givens, guys who have been rotational guys that if you probably had to line it up today and roll out with the one defense, those 2 guys are starting. So I do see a situation where this San Francisco defensive line could have 3 rookie starters. because you took Mykel Williams in 1, and then you took Alfred Collins in 2, and then now you got CJ West in 4. And all 3 of these guys could start next to Nick Bosa and be week 1 starters, in my opinion. And then
let me ask you before you go on, because I do want to ask you about that. So with Chris Kocurek as the defensive line coach, what's the big and Robert Saleh back as the defensive coordinator? What's the biggest hurdle to having 3 starters on the defensive line? Because athletically, those guys are as good as anyone. I would imagine in terms of experience playing in the league, that may be a bigger concern. So what are you trying to guard against in terms of making sure they're where they're supposed to be every single play?
Well, you just got to get the fundamentals and techniques right down for them, because a lot of times these guys aren't, used to using their hands because they're used to being just better than the guy lined up across from them. And then you look at a guy like CJ West, who's got shorter arms, and if you know a Chris Kocurek guy is tall and has length, right? That's one of the prerequisites and requirements. However, CJ doesn't fit that, but Chris knows how to use guys like this. So it's learning the fundamentals, the techniques, and being able to use your technique, to help you overcome the fact that you're a rookie. But there's nobody I would trust more than having 3 rookies starting than Chris Kocurek. And so,
let's go to Arizona, where this guy actually looks exactly like a Chris Kocurek type of player.
No, 100%. And I'll say this about Jordan Burch in Arizona. There's nothing he can't do on the football field. I think his number one negative when you turn on the tape and watch is just consistency. And how hard is he going to play? Like, this is a guy, he can weigh from, let's say, 270 to 290, and you won't see a drop-off in his movement and just his overall skill. So, personally, I think he's going to play the outside edge type position. But this is a guy that you could also kick inside and play some 4-eye, play some technique and some sub-rush things. And, again, I think he has all the physical traits to be a really good player and, again, be a day one starter. But for him, can he be consistent, and how can Jonathan Gannon and his defense get that out of him?
Right. So the defensive end, Jordan Burch out of Oregon, he reminded me a little bit in terms of the not incredibly flashy, and I described this to other players as slow burn, but Derek Harmon, who he played next to, who was a first-round pick of the Steelers, in terms of looks the part, getting off the bus. Sometimes you want to see a little more, but that could be a function of being in a different scheme that asks you to do those things that maybe you're better at. But both these teams we just talked about, the 49ers and the Cardinals, went heavy on defense. The Cardinals also got Walter Nolan. They got Cody Simon. They got Will Johnson in the second round. So it feels like there's a push in the NFC West towards defense because of all the offensive playmakers we have in that division. I'm going to go offense when I talk about my guys in the NFC West. I'm going to start in Seattle with Gray Zabel, the first-round pick out of North Dakota State. Played left tackle last season for North Dakota State. He'll probably kick inside to guard on day one. He can play center. We saw him do that at the Senior Bowl and did it flawlessly. And I think, in addition to what he can bring physically, when you talk to teams prior to the draft, they described him as a day one locker room guy and potential future team captain. He'll be penciled in at left guard. How important is it to have someone like a Gray Zabel solidify the center of that offensive line when you have you have Sam Darnold coming in, and we know Sam Darnold's kryptonite is getting rushed up the middle. So that feels like you're solving two problems in one with the Gray Zabel addition.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going with it. Sam Darnold is the type of quarterback that needs to be allowed to step up in the pocket to make his throws. And when he can't do that, then that kind of discombobulates him a little bit. And so being able to solidify the core and the center of your defense, of your offensive line, that allows you to set that firm pocket is going to be needed. Now, personally, I think they got it right in Gray Zabel. You got crossover at your left tackle. I still think there are concerns for the Seattle offensive line from the center over to the right tackle. So it's still a work in progress. And we have to keep in mind that although John Schneider's been there, a ton of years, I think he is one of the longest tenured GMs in our league right now. However, this is the second year of the tenure with Mike Macdonald as head coach. So they're still growing and being able to get those type of players that they need for Mike Macdonald and his team.
Yeah, you mentioned Charles Cross, the former first-round pick. That same draft, they got Abe Lucas, who, when healthy, was able to play right tackle. He's battled his inability to stay healthy, so that's been a concern for sure. But Gray Zabel gets them one step closer to trying to solidify that offensive line at least. All right, Now I'm going to your former team, the Los Angeles Rams, and I think I've talked about these guys before, but they're a little bit off the radar, and I like them both during the pre-draft process. Terrence Ferguson, the Oregon tight end, who they got on day 2 to pair with Tyler Higbee. They have Colby Parkinson in that room. They drafted Davis Allen last year out of Clemson, and then they have wide receiver Konate Mumpfield. They got in the 7th round. Now, Konate ran a 4.59. If he had run a sub 4.5, I think he probably goes top 150. I love the way he played at Pitt, and I love the idea of him fitting into this wide receiver room where Les Snead and Sean McVay take guys that other teams may not take because the measurables aren't there or the physical tools aren't there in terms of speed. Puka Nacua ran in the 4.5s. They took Jordan Whittington last year, who wasn't long on experience, but certainly was explosive. So, Rand, I'll ask you this. How do you expect Sean McVay to use a versatile tight end in Terrence Ferguson, who is a move tight end essentially, and then maybe someone like a Konate Mumpfield, who flew under the radar for a lot of teams, but does a lot of things really well as perhaps a possession receiver at the next level?
Well, let's start with Terrence Ferguson because I think he has a chance to start for these guys. And, Tyler Higbee, when healthy, he is a good, viable tight end for this offense. However, it's staying healthy, and he's battled that his entire career. When we drafted him in 2016, he came in with a knee injury, and so we really didn't get to see much from him that year until training camp. And so he kind of dealt with that for the earlier part of his career. So I think as long as Terrence Ferguson can come in and learn the offense and be someone that Matthew Stafford and those guys can trust, I think he can come in and be a day one starter. Now, Konate Mumpfield, you got to understand, I mean, you got Devontae Adams on one side, you got Puka Nacua on the other side. And although you have, what's the receiver that they drafted in? Yeah, you have Tutu. Shout out to Tutu, Miami Northwestern, 305 guy from down south. But even Tutu has struggled to find a role in this offense and consistently be on the field. He's flashed, but he hasn't been able to find consistency. So I think outside of those top two, you're going to have a competition of who's going to be the third. And if you're Konate Mumpfield, that's all you can ask for. Throw the measurables out the window, throw the 4.5, whatever out of the window. All you can ask for is an opportunity to compete to be the third, fourth receiver, which gets you dressed on game day. And now you're one play away from stepping on the field.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun battle to watch. Tutu Atwell, former day 2 pick, I believe, for the Rams. All right. Those are the divisions in the book. We're going to take one more quick break and come back and wrap things up here. We'll do it right after this break. All right, Rand. OTAs are starting up again this week, and then we'll have a little time off. The NFL teams will. We'll be going on forever because we never stop. 336 days of the draft. But I want to ask you about some of these quarterback competitions for young quarterbacks and youngish quarterbacks. Let's start in New York with the Jets. They signed Justin Fields to a 2-year deal. He is the starter there. Tyrod Taylor is the backup. And we've sort of talked about this in the past. Justin Fields is who he is. What's the best path for the Jets to be competitive in that division, knowing that Justin Fields will never be a guy who's going to throw with Joe Burrow type anticipation, but he is one of the best athletes in the NFL, and also trying to get Garrett Wilson more involved because Garrett's made it known forever, it seems like, that he wants to be the guy and he needs help, and it feels like the Jets are trying to get there with new head coach Aaron Glenn and new GM Darren Mucci.
I think you got to make the commitment that Baltimore made when inserting Lamar Jackson to the lineup. You got to make the commitment to build an offense around him and see what it looks like. And that's just is what it is, because you can't put Justin Fields in an offense and ask him, like you said, to do what a Joe Burrow or Matthew Stafford are asked to do. You got to put him in an offense that's going to take advantage of his skill set, his ability to run, his ability to threaten you with his legs, and then you just got to put the other players around him just have to adjust. It's unfortunate for somebody like Garrett Wilson who wants to run routes, get open, and get the ball, and there'll be a lane in there for that because at some point Justin's going to have to be able to drop back, process, and get the ball out. But again, like I said, you just have to be able to build an offense around him and see what you have.
Hey, let me ask you this, just sort of looking back to the draft when Justin came out. Part of me feels like, I don't want to say he's regressed, but he hasn't progressed as far as I was hoping, because his tape at Ohio State before C.J. Stroud took over was really good. And I thought he had an opportunity to elevate that at the next level. We just haven't seen it, and we can blame maybe being in Chicago to stun his career early on if we want to. But does it feel like he's come close to even scratching the surface on what perhaps we thought he was going to be when he's coming out of Ohio State?
No. Short answer, no. I really like the tape. I remember going back and watching his previous year before his last year. And you talk about, you looking at that college football playoff, and I saw a guy who could manipulate the safety, read the safety, get the ball out, and he made plays and threw absolute dimes throughout that playoff. But like you said, I thought he regressed after that, and he looked like a guy at that point that just start reading half-field reads and would lock on and stay on. Now, again, we don't know how the plays were being called in Ohio State. We don't know what he was asked to do, but it did not look the same from one year to the next, because based off of that previous year's tape, I was from the school of thought that there wasn't that big of a difference between him and Trevor Lawrence. Because I think at that same time, if you go back and you study Trevor Lawrence's games against teams that had NFL caliber secondaries, the Alabamas, the Ohio States that he played, I think his completion percentage was 50% or less, in those games. And again, in my mind, that was what he was going to be facing in the NFL. And we've seen how that's turned out so far. But I thought we'd see a much better version of Justin Fields.
And I think that goes to how incredibly difficult it is to evaluate quarterbacks. And the Trevor Lawrence conversation, Trevor didn't play as well his final year at Clemson as he did previously, to your other point. And there were struggles there, and there were not necessarily concerns. He was QB1 throughout the process. But I think the way that Justin had played, he was making a case to at least be a really good quarterback at the next level. Look, we don't know. We can't get inside Justin's head, but I don't know what the solution is to try to get him back to where he was at Ohio State, because it feels like it's a lack of confidence or something outside looking out or looking in, excuse me. So I don't know how you fix that. And maybe being in New York with not having to look over his shoulder like he did in Pittsburgh, at least last season, it will be better for him. One last thing before we get out of here. Speaking of Pittsburgh, how can you go through OTAs and the minicamp process and maybe even training camp without a quarterback? And by that, I mean Aaron Rodgers, whether there's a nudge, wink agreement between him and Mike Tomlin or not, we don't know. But it feels like Aaron's just going to show up when Aaron's ready. Is that the best way to prepare for a season with a bunch of new teammates?
Absolutely not. And, I mean, the quarterback now, again, we don't know. There are things that happen that I'm not going to speak on, but there are things that happen, and maybe Aaron Rodgers is a little further along with this, Pittsburgh decision, nod, wink agreement, and even what the offense is. We don't know that. However, I think it speaks volumes for the rest of the team. For a guy that you're going to be counting on as your quarterback, he's not on the field with you right now when this is the time of year that you start to build a bond.
Right. And, last year and the year before that, there were concessions made for Aaron. First year, he was in New York more frequently than last year, and he was recovering from the Achilles injury. This year, it's been made clear that there's been 100% attendance for the Jets with these mini camps. So that feels different as well. And the Steelers, a year ago, Mike Tomlin made it clear that he wanted to have his starter known at this point, and that was Russ Wilson. Russ had the calf injury once we got to training camp, and then took over after Jordan started 4-2. After Justin started 4-2. But now, as we sit here in Pittsburgh, no Aaron Rodgers. They have Mason Rudolph, who you had last year in Tennessee, and prior to that, he was with Pittsburgh for a long time. And then, of course, they drafted Will Howard. So we will all find out together, just not right now, Ran. In the meantime, that is it for us here. Check out With the First Pick wherever you get your podcasts. Scan that QR code. In the meantime, have a great Memorial Day weekend, everybody.